so excited today to have all of you join us for Lean on Kindness. And I have an extremely important special guest with us today. She happens to be my cousin. I call her my cousin. She's my first cousin. We were raised together in Utah. I know that state comes up a lot on my podcast, doesn't it? But that's where we're from. What can I say? That's where I'm from. And so I know a lot of people and had a lot of experiences there. Her name is Tarrazzia Martin St. Clair. We are related because our parents are brother and sister. And it's just so amazing to have her here with us today. Today's topic is about abuse. And obviously, abuse is a very unkind thing to do, and it has some negative lasting effects. And we're going to be discussing that with my dear cousin Tarrazzia today. So Tarrazzia, welcome. I'm so glad to have you here today.
Well, it is an honor to be here with you and to share my story, and hopefully it'll have a positive effect on those who hear it and understand what they can do and how they can address it in their daily lives. So thank you for the opportunity, Eileen. And I
Oh,
love
of course.
and I love you.
And I love you too. And I so appreciate this is a very sensitive topic. And so I really appreciate that your honesty and the fact that you would even share, because some people hold back, and I get that. You know, some people have to. But for those who can share to make it better for others, I just have such a heart for. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Tarrazzia, so I just told everyone that you were born and raised in Utah, so we can just start there. And, you were not an only child. So tell me a little bit about your siblings.
Yes, so there are seven children in our family, and they're all in different age ranges. But I was the middle child, of course, and as part of that, we middle child folks, we understand what that looks like. But yeah, beautiful family. Growing up in Utah had its own unique challenges of being a family of color, of diversity. Where the challenges were great when my grandparents or our grandparents, moved there and decided to relocate there from various parts of the country. It was an opportunity to find an opportunity for growth and equity and expansion of their families and safety, in many ways safety. And
Sure.
so what we saw as part of that growing up is the evolution of that storyline. And so we as grandchildren of those folks can tell stories of that journey and how it's affected us in our daily lives today. So that's sort of in summary who we are and how we sort of manifested in Utah.
Right. Well, tell our listeners a little bit about how our grandparents even came to Utah, how your mother got there, how you and I became cousins.
So in that regard, my grandfather, our grandfather, he actually relocated there to work on the Union Pacific Railroad, and had come from Mississippi by way of Kansas City, by way of you name it, to get there during their journeys during those years. And so our grandparents, Andrew and Vivian, ended up moving to Utah as really newbies, young married couple looking to start their lives. And so the Union Pacific Railroad brought a lot of African American and Latino individuals into the Utah sector. And because there was jobs and people were looking for employment, and they were also looking to move away from the South, where a lot of segregation issues were happening and a lot of racial tension had already evolved. Many people moved to the West. And so Utah was a stopping ground for many who ended up in California, but Utah became a good haven for safety for many of them. So he worked for the Union Pacific Railroad. My grandmother actually started, I think, the first African American business in a small town in Utah called Ogden, where she started a hair salon because we had so many people of color coming through. There was a need for them to get their hair done, right? And to primp and prep themselves. And all those women were so glamorous during those days. So it was really important to them. So it became a haven for women to come and chat and sort of bond and find solace with each other. And then,
And she indeed kept them tight, didn't she?
yes, she did. Those bumpers, and all those
Yes.
things. Yes, yes, yes.
Those hot curling irons, and it was the La France Beauty Salon. And I just thought that was so elegant when I would drive past that big green building. And you and I recently had an opportunity, well, I had an opportunity to take a picture in front of the building where she had the beauty salon. It's still there in Ogden, Utah. And so that was just a real fun memory.
It's a wonderful memory, and it's also a statement of who our grandparents were, right? Andrew took the risk of relocating to a brand new state in a time of uncertainty. And, our grandmother chose, we have multiple grandmothers, but our grandmother chose that she was going to be a business owner in a time when it was unheard of in many ways.
Absolutely.
One of our aunts, our sort of play aunts, she also started a restaurant right next door called the Porters and Waiters Club, which was really a place where the porters who worked on the railroad, porters and waiters were a big thing then. We had real food on the railroads during that time, and so those individuals had to have places to go to eat, right, and
Sure.
places to stay. So they became sort of housing situations and food situations and getting your hair done, where it was just this little cultural dynamic that manifested there. And we became benefactresses of that culture and of that history. And so I think what we see now is where we've come from because of the sacrifices they made. And believe me, folks, in Utah during that time, there was a lot of racism, a lot of racism. But they made it through and they survived and they made us stronger because of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, just to try to make it a little clear in regards to our relation, my grandfather met your grandmother and they were married.
Yeah.
My grandfather had a son who is my father, and your grandmother had a daughter who is your mother.
Yeah.
So that's how we then became first cousins.
Exactly.
So yeah, just so because there are probably some people listening going, "Now wait a minute, I didn't know anything about this." So just want to make that clear. So
Yes, ma'am.
tell us a little bit about your parents, Tarrazzia.
So my parents, hold on, we've got a Zoom issue. So my parents, actually, it's kind of an interesting story. But my mother was a nurse, and she went to school for many years to become an RN. But she, did all of that in terms of making a way for her family. And again, my grandmother, who was our really strong matriarch, sort of helps lay the foundation for that during that time of uncertainty, as I mentioned before. My father, as we've evolved, we're figuring out as a Latino man, male, who we are not really clear on who he is, but he certainly was part of the family lineage, and still learning more about that history and that evolution. So I don't have much to share on that front, but I think being raised by a strong matriarch and a family of really strong women really help me, and I believe you to understand the criticality of that woman power and that woman energy and that female thing that we call female energy today. But that's kind of how we've evolved here. So not much to share on the father's side other than Latino heritage, Mexican actually, and then African American. So that's sort of the combo platter of what you see
And
with me.
this is a recent revelation for you in regards to your DNA.
Yes,
And so I know that you're still just exploring and trying to find out more about that. And I'm just so anxious to find out more as you find out more.
absolutely.
So there you are, this middle child, and you're living in Ogden, Utah, and experiencing some of the things that we experienced with racism, and just general, living in a family with a single mother and some of the challenges that that might bring. Can you think of some of your first recollections of unkindness being shown either towards you, to your family, watching someone being bullied, what were your experiences? Some of your first recollections as a little girl.
Oh, that's an excellent question. So I remember many actually, but I just want to lay a foundation for my answer. So during that time, just so the audience understands, there were laws in place that said if you were a single parent or you needed help from the state, such as, what we call today welfare or support in that regard, if you had a male in your household, you couldn't get those services. And so what we found in the culture is a lot of people had to live without men in their homes in order to get services from the state. And so, with that, whatever decisions my mother may or may not have made during that time was survival. And I think that is part of what we sort of saw growing up is that she was a single mother. She did have a few children, of course, and she'd been married a couple of times as well. But, times were hard and you only could make a certain amount of money because of your ethnicity and your, whatever your background was. And so those challenges manifested in different ways in the home. And part of what we know now is that created a culture where people treated you differently because of the color of your skin, but also because of your economic status. And so that in the school system was, I remember, as you asked, one of my first negative experiences. I'm not sure exactly what grade I was in, but it was one of the younger years where the teachers would treat you differently in school because of who you were and because of your difference, or maybe because of the way you wore your hair, or maybe even your perspective, right? Because it may not have been in their mind a uniform normal perspective, which whatever
Because
normal
they're
means.
from a different culture and they don't understand maybe how you
Exactly.
might have worn your hair or how you may have been dressed. And then from an economic standpoint, maybe you didn't have, clothes that were as nice as some of the other kids. So that was something obvious and a way for them to set you apart.
Exactly, exactly. And so unkindness came often, based on those differences. Kindness came too, though it was somewhat of a balance. I met a lot of angels in my life.
Sure.
Uh,
And we're going to talk about those
yeah.
as
So
we
so I
as we
think it
move forward.
Yeah, I think it was elementary school, Eileen. Honestly, I think that was the first time. And then certainly, things happened later, but I began for me to address that and to handle it, right, emotionally and psychologically, you begin to sort of close yourself out from the negative energies, right? So it becomes sort of a way of survival. And so, yes, a lot of unkindnesses came. Elementary school was, I would say, my first foray into that negativity, which caused me to request at 8, I think I was 8 or 9 years old, my grandmother to allow me to go to Catholic school separate from regular school, because of the situation and the indifference and the unkindness. That was one of the keys that drove me to request to go to a different school and to really grow up in a Catholic faith, in that way.
So, would you say then that during that time you really did internalize that unkindness and were just having a difficult time just existing in that school, which caused you to ask to please go someplace else? Interesting that at such a young age you had the fortitude to even do that, to even say, "I want to go to school, but I can't go here."
Right. Yeah, and out of seven, right? Out of seven, here's this little middle kid going, "This is not working for me." And I was kind of a nerd in many ways, right? I love my books and I love to be in my space, my safe space. But I think part of it was I had gone to church with a friend, and she was Catholic, and my grandmother was AME Methodist, as you know, but my mother was Baptist, and so we had all this diversity happening in the house from a spiritual perspective. But I went to church with this friend of mine. I can't recall her name, by the way, but that one moment in that Catholic church, going through the Mass ceremony, the ceremony and the ritual of the Mass, moved me so deeply that I believe I cried the entire time I was in the church. That's how emotionally I was affected, and that then springboarded into me asking, "Hey, I really think this is where I want to be. I mistook her grandmother. Will you help me get there? And it's going to cost money. Can you afford it? And can we do it?" And she sacrificed her tips as a hairdresser to make sure that I was able to go and afford it. So it was a big kindness sacrifice for her to do that for me.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, to see that in you out of
Yeah.
the seven and be able to move forward to help you in that way.
Yeah.
We need those little stair steps, don't we? Those little stair steps of kindness to just keep us going. It's amazing the difference that it makes in our lives.
Yeah.
So with that, we're going to get into another area of your life as we move forward in the interview, but we're just going to take a really quick break. Okay. We're back with Tarrazzia Martin St. Clair, my special guest today. And we are going to be moving forward as we talk a little bit about how abuse played a role in Tarrazzia's life. Of course, that's a very unkind behavior. And we're gonna talk a little bit about how that played out with you, Tarrazzia. So if you could uh, talk about or discuss with us maybe some of your first memories of how abuse began to come into your life.
Absolutely. So I've actually written a small story about this to share my experience. And so when I speak to this, it's very emotional for me. So I want to just say up front, this is difficult and challenging, but I'm honored to share so that others don't have to experience the same thing. And if they do, how they would best maybe deal with it. So I preface it with that. So it started actually the first time that I was sexually abused. I believe it was somewhere around maybe 10 years old or so. I fail to remember the exact years, but it was certainly under 10 or around that time.
And by this time, you were in the Catholic school.
I was in Catholic
Right.
school at that
Okay.
time, and because our mother, had to work a lot, because she had to work two jobs, right, to make enough to even afford to feed everyone, but also the challenges of all that we've talked about already. And so just imagine, I'm at home alone in this example, and everyone was out doing something, but I was in the home we had a dog at the time, and the dog was with me, and the neighbor next door came over, and I was friends with his daughter, and he had other children too. So we would play together and things like that. But he came over, and he knew that no one was there. I'm assuming he had been monitoring, right, what adults were around. And I opened the front door, and he came. I said, "Well, my mom's not here." Blah blah blah, and he sort of forced his way in to the house, and just took full advantage of this child. And it was horrible and awful, and I won't go into the specific details of it. But it really was the most alarming and difficult thing for me to deal with, because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was happening. I just, at that age, you don't think about these things, right?
No,
And so
no.
all of the emotion of that, and then the anger of that too, right? So after, it was,
Now, when you let him in, did you feel like you could trust him because he was your next door neighbor? Did you feel like there was just something a little different about the way that he was behaving, maybe his demeanor?
I didn't sense anything because, again, like you're saying, I mean, he did live next door. I knew his children and his wife actually, and they were very kind up until that time. And then, he when he came in, I said, my mom's not home, and I tried to shut the door, to close the door, but then he sort of pushed himself in. So then I began to feel something, right, that this is a little odd, and why are
Oh,
you doing that? So that occurred, and then after it happened, then he left, and I kind of laid there on the floor and just cried, because I didn't know what to feel. I knew it wasn't right. I knew I didn't feel good about it. I felt violated, all the emotions you can imagine. But I frankly didn't know what to do. I thought, did I do something wrong? Already in my brain, did I do something wrong? Why
it's
did
your
this
fault.
happen? Yes, all of
Yeah.
the guilt, all
Yeah.
of the guilt. So that was the first example, and it was pretty horrific. And I did share it, of course, with my mom and my grandmother and my family, and they had a reckoning with him. Um, but it didn't, what did it do? It didn't change what happened, right? The reckoning happened. I'm not sure they called the police. I don't remember them doing any of that, right? So that was the
Your
first.
mother was in no position, I'm sure, to move or, do any of that to try to protect you to get away from the situation.
Exactly, exactly. And if she were able to, she may not have known how, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's the kindness
Different
part of my
time.
spirit that says she may not have known what to do herself, right? And she was a strong woman. I don't want anyone to believe she was a weak human being and not capable. I think during those times, though, there were only so many things you could do in her situation, with her ethnicity, living in a state like Utah, with all the other factors. So
Mhm.
I believe that
And
all of
who
that.
and who would even maybe even believe it,
Exactly,
when you
or
think about
care.
it. Yeah.
Yes, or care.
Hmm.
Exactly.
Hmm.
So yeah, so that was the first incident, and there were a couple more after that that occurred, and you know, I don't know if you want me to go into detail on those, but very similar situations where you're in a situation where you think, at least in the second incident, that you could trust someone, and then they take advantage of you, and really leave you just wounded and scarred. And
Well, and that's the thing, people, when they think of child abuse, they may think that maybe something happened with someone that you don't know. And typically, what we find is that it is people that you do know. And that is how it just makes it so easy for someone to abuse a child, is it's usually from someone that the child knows. And in your particular situation, it sounds like that was the case for the times that you were, which is a very frightening situation. Very, very frightening.
Absolutely. And I think one thing, just to comment on that, is that they say that people who actually do commit child abuse or rape, or take advantage of children or other people, whatever it may be, they covet their victim. They covet them,
Yes,
meaning they watch them, they observe them, and in their mind, they're getting there mentally to do whatever act they take. And that is a process, but it is a very, very dysfunctional, broken, attack oriented, a sort of victimization mentality, where they're coming in to victimize someone that they feel they can take advantage of.
sure.
So the psychology of that is so deep when you think about it, in terms of how people get to that place where they think they can do that without repercussion. And that's a big part of your act of kindness, right? How do you see that and then forgive someone,
For
forgive
doing
them for
that.
their ineptitude, right? And that's part of the equation of the whole storyline there.
Sure. And so what did you do to cope? I mean, your grandmother definitely got involved. They talked to him. Your mother and grandmother talked to the gentleman next door. How did you move forward? And then after that, have it happen again, and then have it happen again several times in your young life. How were you coping?
So that is the best question ever. As I mentioned before, I'm an introvert extrovert, if we want to categorize. And so usually with extroverts, they go out to get the energy out from others, right? Because it's an energy builder for them. But in an introvert's life, and at that time I would say I was more of an introvert than anything, is I began to just focus on within, and I just became an avid reader. I'm an avid reader even today, but I'm also just always learning. Either using something with my brain to expand it, but always sort of dealing with things sort of outside of the human being, right? But dealing with things like paper and book, and even when television, when I would watch, but it was all consuming for me to block out those things, but to protect myself from them. And so, for in many ways, I just began to just say, okay, give me my books. I would go sit in the closet. We had a closet in the house at that time, and that I would go to, and I would take my pillow in there with a flashlight, and I would just go in there and read, or I would color, or I would do whatever I would do, but that would be my safe space alone, which allowed me to stay safe in my mind. I was safe because I was alone, and no one could hurt me there in my mind.
Yes,
And
yes. And
that's
so feeding your mind was so important at the time, to feed it with as many positive things as you could to keep yourself going,
mhm,
intellectually. And then from a space standpoint, being in a closet, being enclosed, almost as if you were being hugged in some sort of a way that no one could get around you. I could feel how you would want to just be, enclosed where no one could touch you, could be around you, that you were fearful of, or didn't even know that that you had to be fearful of.
exactly, exactly. And people would come and go because again, there were seven kids and they were in different age groups, but older, with their friends and things like that. And I would, engage, of course, but I'd always find myself back in whatever safe space I could find for myself, where I
Yes,
felt secure and, maybe not 100%, but in my mind, it was a secure
yes,
space. Yeah,
yes.
yeah, exactly.
It's just so amazing how strong the mind is, isn't it? It
Yes.
truly can change your life, your mind.
Exactly.
And that's the thing, we can change, and we're going to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
So this abuse is going on. How is it affecting your family? Do your brothers and sisters know this is going on? I know your grandmother and your mother knew, but what about your siblings, and were any of them being exposed to any of this?
So we've talked about it over the years, but I don't believe that any of them have shared stories with me where this same thing occurred with them, not in the way that it occurred with me. And so, as I've gotten older, and we've all gotten older, I'm able to talk about it more openly.
Yes.
Before that, though, it was my thing, right? I'm dealing with it myself. My mother knew, yes, my grandmother knew, and perhaps my oldest sister knew. Uh, but again, I don't recall sitting down and kind of giving them the detailed rendition because that was not ever asked. I
So
could.
once you would tell them, you might have a little discussion about it, but it wasn't anything ongoing. I mean, back then, who knew about therapy, or anything like that? And certainly, you certainly didn't hear about a lot of African Americans or Black people going into therapy. That was something that cost a lot of money for one thing, and in your situation with the single mom, I can't even imagine.
Right.
So, it wasn't an ongoing conversation that you were having.
Exactly, exactly. And I recall, sharing what occurred, and I was in tears the first incident. And it was like, "Are you okay?" Yes. And then I got a little sort of physical examination to make sure I was okay. And that was it. It was sort of done. Now on to the next thing, either starting dinner or whatever it was. It wasn't addressed as it was some sort of major crisis and life was over because this happened, and maybe
So sort
because.
of like moving on.
Yep, it's to survival, right? Because everything was at that time absolute survival mode.
Mhm, mhm.
Every single thing because of the culture and all the other things we mentioned earlier. So yeah, that's how it was. That's how it was. And so with my siblings, I mean, I would share stories with them, but I would never go into those details, because it was really I felt it was my trauma, right? My issue, my thing to address. And
Right.
I think that's why I internalized those things and addressed them myself in the way that I chose to do. if that makes sense.
Yes, yes. And of course, now we would tell our girls something totally different,
Absolutely.
not to make sure you call the police on those. But, it's just an example of how it was. You do what you know how to do. You do the best that you can given the information that you have at any given time in your life. So, high school. Let's talk a little bit about high school. So, I'm kind of thinking, and of course, I know this already, you were an excellent student.
I actually was an excellent student in many ways. In many ways, I had sort of moved emotionally and intellectually beyond the classroom. So I was also a disruptor. But so, but yes, absolutely, absolutely. And having, sort of started early, wanting to know as much as I could, because my initial goal and my spirit was to leave Utah as soon as possible, get away from it, away from all the things, including the abuse and other factors. And I just knew I wasn't supposed to be there. I felt it in my heart, in my spirit, that I needed to go somewhere
Move
else.
on.
I didn't know where. I didn't know if it was a spiritual move or a physical move, but I knew that that was not where I was supposed to be. So in school, I mean, I started my first business at 15 in high school, cleaning houses for the neighbors. And I did that to make money so that I could, either buy books or whatever I chose to buy at that time, probably candy, bad things. Um, but that allowed me to sort of begin to build that work ethic right around, because I watched my grandmother, who worked tirelessly every single day, every day of the week except Sundays, doing hair all day on her feet. And I watched my mother go out to be a nurse, and she'd leave early in the morning. She worked in Salt Lake. So it took her like a couple hours to get to work and then a couple hours to get home. Everybody was working because they had
Right.
to work, work,
Right.
work to make money to pay the bills. And so I understood the work ethic part, but I really began to understand how critical it was to have even my own business at that age so that I could have my own resources to do what I wanted to do for myself.
Right. And you knew that eventually that was going to get you out of Utah.
I
If you
did.
need the money, you were going to eventually get out of there. But another thing that I know that you knew is how important education was for that to actually happen. That you becoming educated would eventually provide for you financially to be able to do some of the other things that you wanted to do. Not saying that money was the only thing. Obviously, you're an intellectual, and it's something that was important for you to just survive. You had to feed your mind, but
Yeah.
also from a financial standpoint. Um, a question that I wanted to ask you is about your romantic life. When did you start dating? And given the abuse that you had been through, how did that ultimately affect your life as far as dating? And what did you kind of feel was normal, and how that affected you in your dating life?
Well, that's very interesting. So there were always boys, right? Always boys, either tomboys or boys who wanted to beat me up or knock me down and tear my stockings, whatever it was, right? Coming up in elementary and middle school. But what I say is I really didn't start really dating until I went away to college. It wasn't a thing for me. I wasn't looking for a boyfriend or anything like that. And it wasn't on my radar to do so. I was so focused on the other things that it wasn't a thing for me. Now, were there guys who wanted me to go out with them or date or whatever? Yep. In fact, for I think high school, was it prom or something like that? I did, because I'd already kind of finished a lot of my credits. I did go to prom. I went with this guy named Richie Fronda, who was a Latino guy, and we just went as friends. We didn't go as dating, right? It wasn't a dating thing. And then when I went away to college, I was like, OMG, there's all these guys and there's all these people, and what am I supposed to do with this, right? So it was
Right,
like,
right.
so it sort of
Well, it
opened.
had to be kind of, I mean, were you a little afraid given some of the sexual abuse that you'd had, or were
I don't
you
think I consciously thought about
thought
being
about it?
afraid because of that. I just didn't know how to engage.
I
I
see.
had examples, right? Our grandparents, they had been married for many, many years, and up until they passed away, they were together. And they had ups and downs like all marriages do. So that was the example I had, right? My mom's example wasn't really an example, maybe that wasn't. She was in love many times. They were, many of her husbands, they had good relationships and then not so good relationships, but the example of a man and woman having this thing and evolving and growing and all that stuff, that was TV, right? That was television or other images from books and love stories. But for me personally, to experience that sort of came really late in the game.
Sure. Yes.
And um, but when it did happen, I didn't know. I learned a lot. I learned the hard way in many cases because I didn't know how to do it well. just like riding a bike, right? If you can't do it well, you're going to keep falling down.
Right. That's
So
right.
I think I got better at it over the
As
years.
it came. So one of the first more serious relationships that you had. How did that work out for you regarding what you felt like you should tolerate because of what you had experienced in your life up to
Well,
that point?
I think definitely, even though at that time in my life I wasn't a strong presence. I think now certainly I'm in a different place, and but in those years, I was very insecure, not only about, my physical being, but how I looked and how I appeared and how people perceived me, all those things growing up like any teenager or young adult would be. And I went through a lot of that of not knowing how to be accepted and all of those things. So during that time, I was just looking for, when I realized that, I think I was just looking for love, right? Looking for someone to pay attention to me because I'm here and, blah, blah, blah. So there were many fits and starts on this one, Eileen. I mean, I dated several people that were not the best for me emotionally, but also spiritually or mentally, right? So a lot of men, I won't say all men, of course, but some of the men that I, dealt with or dated were very narcissistic. Now that we have this great term that we use, but very focused on themselves. And they weren't focused on my personal development or growth. It was like, we're just kind of in this thing, and what can you do for me, what can I do for you, kind of thing. It wasn't real relationships. It was
Yes.
transactional things. And so I would say that the first relationships or first couple of were not, they were not emotionally stable. They were very unstable. In fact, one of the persons that I dated in those years was a young man who was very abusive and very controlling. And so it ended up being where, he was actually assaulting me, and not sexually, but certainly physically and emotionally. So it's a lot of emotional abuse, and I accepted it because I didn't know what I didn't know. But as soon as I found out, that was over.
Well, so
So
again, here you are going through this abuse. I mean, you go through it when you're little, you go through it when you're high school. Now you're in college, and you're going through it again. Certainly, feeding your mind with all the things you need to cope. But then you find yourself in it again, and
yeah,
that must have been quite an eye opener for you to see that it was continuing.
yeah.
Um, what was it? Was it that when did the straw break the camel's back? How was it that you finally got out of this situation? A little bit about getting out of college. What happened there?
Oh, amazing story. So, and I can laugh about it now, but during the time I was in total chaos mode. Um, but this guy that I was dating, who was the abuser, who was just really just very, very controlling, and we were at a wedding. At one of our family members were getting married in Layton, I think it was, and he, for some reason, did not like the dress that I was wearing. It was so bizarre, but it was no, it wasn't really about the dress. It was about other things, I'm sure.
Sure.
But so he didn't like this dress, and so he wanted me to go home and change the dress. And I said, "No, I'm not doing that. I'm here. We're having a good time. My mom's here. My family's here." And he got very insane, and we were in the parking lot of the venue, and he decided that he was going to hit me. So he did. And of course, being me, I hit him back, of course. And then he ripped the dress. So he didn't mean to rip it off me, but he ripped it by pulling it, right? And so that was it. That was sort of the one trigger that got me there. And then there was another incident about 2 weeks later where we were at another location and the same kind of situation.
It kept
So
happening over and
that
over again.
so that night, I called 911 and I said, "This guy needs to go. Here's what happened, blah, blah, blah." And police came and they arrested him. And they arrested him because it had an existing warrant. So I didn't know about that either. But that was sort of the trigger for me to say, okay, I can be free of this, right? Because I'm in this do loop of dysfunction. I'm not happy. I know this isn't right. This is not how I'm supposed to live. But it took sort of those triggers for me to get there emotionally. And then once that happened, I decided that I was going to leave Utah. And so it allowed me to put separation between me and the situation. So my aunt Annabelle Weekly, she actually helped me buy a new vehicle. I was living in Salt Lake at that time, and she allowed me to help me buy. I had an old car, but she helped me get a new one. Bought a new vehicle, and then I started applying for jobs. in the DC area, and actually got hired. There were 6 offers on the table, and I took one to work with the IRS, which I'd already been working at in Utah anyway. And so I said, I'm relocating, and I put all my stuff in that car, and I drove across country with one of my dear friends, Anna Delgado, and we ended up here. So that's how I got away from the situation physically, spiritually, and emotionally. It was one fell swoop, and
Totally removed yourself from it. And let me tell you, people, she moved from Utah to Washington, D.C. She got very far away.
coast to coast, we're out of here.
I mean to tell you, coast to coast. And
Yeah.
so you mentioned Annabelle Weekly, and she's a story within herself. And unfortunately, we don't have the time to, go through her story, but stay tuned. I think that her name will be coming up in a few of my podcasts. But this is someone who made a big difference in your life. So earlier we had talked about who are some of, what were some of the kind things that people did for you? How did that change your life? Kindness.
Well, when you think of sort of the pros and cons of life, or the negatives and the positives, without the negatives, you can't really realize the positives, and same on the other side of that. And so all the bad things were balanced out or even elevated on the positive side. So it was my grandmother, Vivian C. Tucker, as we know, and she was certainly one of the most kind human beings. We all have issues, but for the most part, she was a kind soul, and she made sure her grandkids were taken care of and made sure they had those little special things that mattered on Easter, to get the shoes you wanted with the little bows on them, and make sure your
May
hair was
she
done.
dress.
And yes, she was totally like in this, what, dressing to the nines, as we say.
Yes.
She was one that provided those kind words and encouragement and love, always love first. And she was very spiritual. So we always got to hear about Jesus, and we always got to hear about God and the criticality of living in the right way. Annabelle Weekly was my aunt, and she was the one that I mentioned earlier, had her restaurant next to the La France Beauty Salon, our grandmother's salon. She was also a woman of pure kindness. She was also a very smart businesswoman. So we got to see the experience of these two women of color leading businesses in a community that didn't want them. Right. But what they did is they always resorted back to kindness and helping others come up. It was always about, what can I do to make your life better? What can I do to make your life better? So that's where it began. But those people laid the foundation for my strength that I see today, and I attribute a lot of whatever success I've had on them because of their kindness and unconditional love of me, and their belief that I could be more and be an example for others. So that's really at the root of it, Eileen. That's how I see it.
And as a result, through all of the abuse, all of the challenges that you had, and having these strong women who were kind to you, and I would imagine you probably had some teachers who believed in you, and other people that kind of came along the way. Tell us what started to happen for you when you got to DC, and some of the wonderful things that have happened in your life as a result of you sticking it out, and those who led you along the way with their kindness.
Well, I will tell you that, I know that, whatever your spiritual bent is, I know that God loves me. I know that Jesus loves me. And I know the universe loves me, because there's no way that what I've accomplished in my life could have happened without that. And so on this earth, as we mentioned earlier, there are so many angels that we don't even know are angels. We can look back and say the person who let you pull in front of them while you're driving down the highway. It could be any number of kind acts that you see during the day that you may not even quantify in your mind. But the people, when I moved here, finding a place to live, actually the Mormon church helped me find an apartment before I moved here. I called Senator Hatch, who was there at the time. I believe his name was Warren Hatch, or I can't remember his first name now. But I called his office, sent an email or a message to him. I wrote a letter because I don't remember. I think it was email, but and his office actually helped me find a place to live in DC. First act of kindness, right? When I decided to relocate, I
Yes.
get here, I find a woman who lived next door to the apartment I was in, and she helped me get, the right support system around me for getting food and finding the right places to shop. But on the job, angel after angel helped me escalate and elevate in my career. And I could list them: Lily McCracken, Lily Davis, who was one of the first people that saw me as a grade 5 here in Washington, D.C., and made sure that I got to a grade 13. She put me in a career trajectory because she saw in me what others didn't, potentially, right? And that kind of love, it only comes from kindness,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And
And so with that, I know that there are people out there, who might be struggling to just be kind and may not even understand why it's important. May sound like, yeah, it may sound like to them, oh, come on, all this hoorah about being kind. Does it really make a difference? What would you say to those people? Can they change? Can we change? Can we be better? And what does it take?
That's an excellent question. So, first thing I would say is that you have to begin with what's in your heart. There's spirituality. There's all the factors that come internally to you or externally to you. It starts with what's within. You have to know that you are a good person, and being a good person means you have to believe it in your spirit down to the bottom of your toes to the top of your head. I am good. I am a good person. My value is important to this world, to my purpose, to this life. When you get past that, then you can begin to see others' kindness. Because if you're not there in your own spirit, you can't see kindness because you're already in a negative mindset. Your mind is clouded with negativity because of your belief of you. And so I think you start with within, then you can receive it. If you can't receive it, you can't give it. Right.
That
And so
is
I think
such
that's sort of fundamental. I also would say to your wonderful question that you have to know that the way to survive in this life is through love. It is nothing else. If you love yourself and love others, regardless of if they abuse you, step on you, run over your toe, pull in front of you in traffic, you don't get that promotion, the dog ate your homework, come up with every excuse imaginable. But if you don't believe it here, if you don't believe it here that you have to begin with love first, then you will always be in a negative place.
So start from within and then you can get out.
Start with within and know that the core to existence is love.
Yes.
It is all love. And
That's
that's
what
what
we're trying to do here is love, 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 eliminate hate, one story at a time. And that's why we appreciate your story so much, Trazzy, because if anybody, you certainly could have chosen to hate, but instead you chose the opposite. And we get the privilege of having you in our lives. What a beautiful, beautiful thing.
thank you.
The last thing that I would want to ask you is, what do you think as a community of people from, let's just say within our own neighborhoods and which reach out to cities and states in our entire United States, what can we do to work together to promote kindness and eliminate hate one person at a time?
I think that we have a lot of man-made boundaries. They can be religion, they can be work, they can be economic, they can be color of your skin, they can be any number of factors that we hold on to as our identity. I say we're all the same beneath our exterior. And if we can begin to see the world that way, that even though you are brown or green or pink or purple, or you only have $5 versus 5 million, you're still the same internally to your physical self. Your spirit is the same. And I think kindness has to begin with understanding that. Don't judge because you're only judging yourself when you're judging others. So recognize that the spirit is the spirit, that the soul is the soul. And being kind from that place, that again, back to that place of love, you can forgive and you can forget. Those things don't matter. When we're going through challenges in our lives, when everybody was going through COVID, for example, we began to break down those barriers because we all had the same plight, right? Sickness, illness, people dying that we loved and we cared for, economic challenges. I know we became isolated, but we also, I hope, and I felt, began to realize that we're really all in the same boat, regardless. There wasn't enough money that could change you getting COVID and possibly dying. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about your race. It was about you being a human who was vulnerable. And that's what I ask us, Eileen, to your great question is forget the barriers that are man-made. Go back to your spirit and your soul. You're here for a purpose. Focus on those things, not the differences, but the similarities.
And
That's what
this is why I love my cousin so much. That was great. It just pays to be kind. And you were so kind, Tarrazzia, to join us today to tell us your story. And I know that it is going to make a big difference in the way that people see the world and the way that they choose to participate in it. So, with that, my dear cousin, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate you and I love you.
I love you too. Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, of course. God bless.
Be kind.
Be kind. Thank you, Rod. Thank you so much, Cuzzy.
Oh, I hope I did okay.
You were fabulous.
Well, thank you for the questions. I didn't want to go too deep in some of them, but I hope it was enough.
Oh, no, no. And, I would just love to have you on again. There's going to be various different topics that I know that you'll be great at. And so I'll just give you a buzz.
Okay.
And I'm going to call you later because I have to tell you about our trip you can come on in, Chris, my trip to Utah and your uncle and some updates.
Okay, I
Okay.
saw some of the pictures. So yes, call me when you can. I
Yeah,
love
I
you.
will. I will.
Nice
Love
to
you.
meet
Bye.
you, Chris. Adios. Bye.
Adios. Bye-bye.
Without love.